Beyond history, head on into the Iceberg, a different course for the Titanic. Chapter 1. The Downfall.
Rossmore! Eugene!
My own cry pierces the night, a desperate call swallowed by the raging waves. I struggle through the chaos, stretching my cold arms out, only to witness the darkness of the night and the tumultuous waters devour my children before my eyes. In the distance, my sons call out something, but their words get lost in the turmoil. The sea rages around me, and I feel powerless in its merciless embrace. Their words, a last attempt to reach me, echo in my heart as I desperately reach for them, torn away by the relentless force of the sea. I feel like a tiny plaything in the ruthless grip of the forces of nature. The sea seems to have conspired against me, and I am a mere speck in this merciless game. I would sacrifice everything to reach my sons, to hold them in my arms and protect them from this merciless violence. The Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912, and more than 1,500 people lost their lives. The ship, deemed unsinkable, struck an iceberg and broke in two before sinking into the icy waters of the North Atlantic. Among the victims were my beloved sons, Rossmore and Eugene, who were swallowed by the icy waters. Rossmore was 16, and Eugene was 13. The memory of that fateful day will haunt me forever. Chapter 2. The Invitation. Years after this tragedy, as life slowly continued, I received a surprising invitation to a meeting in London. The invitation came from Masabumi Hosono and Bruce Ismay, two other survivors of the Titanic disaster. I knew both men from the newspaper reports that had covered the tragedy. Their names were closely associated with the disaster, and they had been shunned by society ever since. People saw them as symbols of failure and complicity in the tragedy. Hosono was the only Japanese passenger aboard the Titanic, and his decision to leave the sinking ship before all the children and women were saved was heavily criticized in his homeland. Ismay, on the other hand, was the former director of the White Star Line, the Titanic's shipping company. He was publicly condemned for his perceived role in the catastrophe. At first, I hesitated to accept the invitation. After all these years, when I thought I had shed all my tears, I found myself in a strange emptiness. The intensity of grief, pain, but also joy seemed to have withdrawn from my life. My days flowed by in a silent routine, despite my remarriage to George Williams, a wonderful man who filled my life with warmth once more. Yet, like a shadow, there was always a melancholy over my soul. I feared that the old wounds would reopen, and the memories of the tragedy and the loss of my sons would overwhelm me again. And I knew that despite George's loving support, I would not survive another phase of such torment. Ultimately, I made the decision to accept the meeting. It was my curiosity that finally moved me. What stories might these two men, from different worlds, but marked by the same burden of social exclusion, want to share with me? What hopes and expectations did they attach to our meeting? So I overcame my doubts and agreed to meet the two survivors. The fear of regretting it was dulled by my numb indifference that had gripped me in recent years. My husband saw an opportunity in this meeting for me. He saw how much the past still weighed on me, and he knew I wanted to find peace at last. With his loving support and encouraging words, he gave me the motivation to take this step. His belief that this encounter would be good for me strengthened my resolve. Perhaps the meeting would somehow encourage me to accept my past and heal the wounds of my soul. Chapter 3. The Meeting. The meeting took place at Café Royal in London, not far from my apartment. As Masabumi Hosono and Bruce Ismay warmly welcomed me, and we sat facing each other, I immediately felt a deep connection. Our shared history, marked by the tragedy and the desperate struggle for survival on the Titanic, bound us in a special way. Hosono smiled hesitantly as he raised his voice and began slowly. "Mrs. Abbott, we are deeply grateful that you have responded to our invitation. We weren't sure if you would even respond to our contact. You probably know the reports that condemn us in connection with the sinking of the Titanic." I nodded hesitantly and noticed that Hosono was close to tears. Ismay continued awkwardly. "I want to explain the reason for our invitation to you without any detours. We have learned, Mrs. Abbott, that you are one of those who were saved from the icy waters while your 2 sons had to lose their lives. Both Hosono and I were fortunate to get into one of the lifeboats, and that will burden us forever, because these boats were actually meant for women and children." Hosono, filled with remorse, added softly, "It should have been you and your children in that boat, not us. It shouldn't have been us who survived, but your innocent children and you." I listened to them in silence, devoid of any emotional response. It was as if my feelings had frozen long ago, unable to react to their words. Hosono continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "Mrs. Abbott, since that dreadful night, our lives have lost all value. In our homeland, we are outcasts. We are seen as cowards. Worse yet, we are held partially responsible for the deaths of many innocent people. We have lost our jobs, our communities shun us, and we feel isolated and damned. We are broken men, addicted to alcohol, plagued by terrible nightmares, and tormented by unimaginable guilt. The belief in any meaning in life has left us." Hosono's eyes filled with tears that painfully reflected his inner torment. "Is that why you are here? To tell me this?" I asked tonelessly. Ismay replied softly, "We are searching for peace, for a kind of absolution. That's why." "Tell me your stories," I interrupted him. Even though a lot had been written about them in the press, I wanted to hear their version of events before we discussed any absolutions. I asked Hosono to share his experiences first. There was a moment of silence as we prepared to reopen the deep wounds of the past and share our experiences with each other. Chapter 4. Masabumi Hosono's Story. Hosono leaned back, rubbed his face, and began to tell his story. His eyes seemed fixed, filled with suffering as he looked back in time, recalling the events that had forever changed his life. Just before the tragedy, I was working as an officer for the Japanese Ministry of Transport in Russia, researching the Russian state railway system. My return journey to Tokyo was supposed to take me through England and the USA. I arrived in Southampton, where fate brought me on board the Titanic, Hosono began. The first days on the ship were filled with excitement and adventure for me. The Titanic was a marvel of modern technology, and I was so impressed by its luxury and comfort, he continued. But then came the collision with the Iceberg. He lowered his gaze, and his voice grew softer. The ship trembled as if it had its own heartbeat. The sound of the collision pierced through my sleep, and I was violently awakened from my dreams. It wasn't until some time later, as I heard panic and chaos outside, that I began to grasp the seriousness of the situation. Hosono described how he rushed to the deck in his pajamas and how he, with his own eyes, witnessed the extent of the catastrophe in disbelief. The icy water was washing over the ship, and it was clear that the Titanic was doomed. Lifeboats were being lowered, but the chaos and haste left little room for orderly evacuation. I fought my way through the crowd, desperately searching for a place in a lifeboat. Time seemed to stand still as I looked out over the deck and saw the terrible confusion. The sound of screaming passengers and the creaking of the ship, slowly tilting into the depths, resounded in my ears. As I tried to make my way further toward the lifeboats, I was stopped by a crew member. He mistook me for a third-class passenger and denied me access. "Please, let me through," I begged desperately. I tried to explain the misunderstanding with gestures and words, but dressed only in my pajamas, I naturally had no papers or anything with me. For Hosono, the love for his family was the driving force that made him desperately want to survive. In the midst of the raging chaos, the longing to hold my family in my arms again burned like a fire in my heart. With their image in mind, I fought my way in a different direction through the crowds, desperately seeking an escape. With fearful eyes, I watched as lifeboats were being launched. 4 boats had already disappeared, and the prospect of escaping this disaster was becoming increasingly unlikely. I panicked as I realized that I would never see my beloved wife and children again. The fear that gripped Hosono that night seemed to reflect on his face. Around me was a terrible scene. In addition to the ever-increasing panic, distress rockets were fired, filling the night sky with bright flashes and thunderous bangs. In my desperation, I wanted to ask an officer for help when he shouted to another man on an evacuation boat, "Women and children only. Leave the boat immediately." From the press, I later learned that it was First Officer William Murdoch, who unfortunately did not survive the disaster either. I will never forget the scene when the man in the boat suddenly helplessly swung an oar wildly to defend his place, while panicked mothers shielded their children. The officer was hit so hard by the oar that he nearly stumbled over the railing, had I not managed to hold him back. Other passengers and crew members rushed to him, trying to calm the man down. His desperate face has remained etched in my memory to this day, along with the deafening shot that hit the man out of nowhere. I couldn't tell where the shot came from or what happened to the man, because I fled in horror and fought my way through the agitated crowd once again. Although the feeling of powerlessness overwhelmed me after this traumatic event, I still searched for a way to survive and waited trembling for my opportunity. Hosono swallowed thoughtfully. The number of remaining lifeboats rapidly diminished, and I had almost resigned myself to my fate. Internally, I tried to prepare myself for the terrible moment of the sinking, but with every step I took on the crowded deck, my determination suddenly grew again to survive. I had to reach my family. I couldn't abandon them. Hosono slammed his fist on the table, and we could all empathize with the dilemma he must have faced back then. When I finally managed to get to another location where there were still lifeboats available, I was again confronted with the prioritization of women and children during the evacuation. However, the chaos and confusion meant that this practice was not consistently adhered to. I faced a moral dilemma. I wanted to survive at all costs and reach the lifeboat. At the same time, I wrestled with my conscience, knowing that women and children should be saved first, and it would be unfair to push ahead of them. But in the chaos and desperation, it was impossible for me to make rational decisions. Hosono stared at the tabletop and shook his head. Suddenly, there was an opportunity. A lifeboat that was already occupied by some women and children still had room for more passengers. The person in charge on board the lifeboat, his name was Edward Bewley, as I later found out, decided to allocate the remaining seats to men in order to save as many people as possible. In that moment, I took the step and, along with another man, took a seat next to the other frightened passengers. It was a decision guided by survival instinct and fear. Although I knew that women and children should have had priority, I still tried to save my own life. A few minutes later, as we shockingly watched the Titanic sink, I could hardly believe that I had survived while others drowned right in front of us. Hosono wiped tears from his face. Finally, an overwhelming silence fell. We survivors on the lifeboat shivered in the icy wind and tried to comfort each other. I pulled my pajama shirt over my head because I knew I had a long, cold, and painful journey ahead of me to reunite with my family. But the first step had been taken. The hours on the lifeboat were marked by a mixture of relief and fear. The boat rocked on the waves as we desperately tried to avert our gaze from the countless bodies in the water. Above us stretched a sky with sparkling stars, in bitter contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded before our eyes. So, an eternity passed on the boat until the rescue ships appeared and took the survivors on board. A mixture of gratitude and sorrow overwhelmed me as I was pulled from the boat onto the Carpathia by the rescue crews. I sat captivated by Hosono's story, feeling a restlessness spreading within me. It was as if I stood before a door leading to a room full of stories and emotions. I couldn't wait to learn more about his life after being saved. The meeting with these two gentlemen who shared the same fate as me seemed to trigger a kind of revival in me. It was a mixture of excitement and fear, because I knew that these stories could also reopen old wounds. But at this moment, I didn't want to think about the trauma. I wanted to focus entirely on Hosono's story. His eyes lit up as he remembered the moving events that led him back to his family. After I was saved and arrived in New York, I found comfort and support from my friends and acquaintances. They helped me find a way back to Japan, to my family, whom I missed so painfully. The news of my survival story spread like wildfire and soon caught the attention of the local press. They called me the lucky Japanese boy, even though I was already 42 years old at the time. Nevertheless, I found this nickname somehow fitting because it truly reflected my feelings about this miracle and the infinite relief that I had survived. Hosono took a deep breath. Finally, the day came when I felt solid ground in Tokyo again. The excitement and joy were indescribable as I embraced my family. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I received the warm hugs and congratulations of my loved ones. The entire neighborhood came together to celebrate this special moment with us, Hosono said with a radiant smile. It was a reunion celebration, an outburst of joy and gratitude. At that moment, I felt the greatest happiness. I had managed to return to my loved ones. Hosono's memories of his return to his family, those hugs, the joy, and the relieved tears touched the deepest roots of my heart. I could feel the emotional force of this reunion, and I could only vaguely imagine what it must have been like for Hosono to finally be reunited with his family after all the pain and separation. "How did things go for you after that?" I asked, empathetically, eager to learn about the difficult phase after Hosono's rescue. His voice grew quieter again, With every interview I gave, my fame grew. My story found its way into various magazines and newspapers, including the major Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun. A photo of me and my family was printed on the front page. But as the world learned about my incredible rescue, the wave of public condemnation also grew. I was particularly criticized in the United States. Archibald Gracie, a writer who had also survived the sinking of the Titanic, referred to me as a stowaway aboard Lifeboat 10 in his best-selling book about the disaster. Stowaway? I couldn't hide my surprise and wanted to know more about this accusation. Hosono sighed and continued. Yes, that's what they called us. Us men who had managed to get on a lifeboat. They claimed that we had disguised ourselves as women. The person in charge of the boat, Mr. Bewley, even made this statement before an investigative committee. Perhaps because I had pulled my pajama shirt over my head to protect myself from the cold. But that was it. I didn't dress as a woman. Nevertheless, the accusations and rumors naturally spread in Japan as well and hit me with full force. Public opinion, which first celebrated me as a lucky survivor, quickly changed. Suddenly, I was the coward who had pushed ahead of women and children for his rescue. The consequences were devastating and plunged me into an abyss of despair. It seemed like the world was conspiring against me when I lost my job at the Ministry of Transportation. My superiors found flimsy reasons to dismiss me, although I knew it was actually related to my role on the Titanic and the need to protect the company's reputation. In the Japanese press, I was portrayed as the timid Titanic survivor. That must have been very difficult for you, I couldn't help but express sympathetically. Very difficult. Hosono struggled with the words, his voice filled with deep sorrow. You can't imagine how utterly shattered I was. A renowned ethics professor published a treatise in which he described my incredible cowardice and cold-hearted ruthlessness on the Titanic, condemning me. He even questioned my honor and my Japanese roots. Letters from outraged citizens reached me, filled with contempt and condemnation. Hosono lowered his gaze and continued speaking with a broken voice. Even our once friendly neighbors, who had generously celebrated my return before, turned against me. They granted interviews to the tabloid press, sharing defamatory anecdotes about me. Eventually, the rumor spread that my story might even appear in textbooks as a cautionary example of cowardice and dishonor. As a result, even my own family turned their backs on me. My wife took the children and moved in with her parents, while I, utterly devastated, fell into alcoholism, unable to intervene. Darkness enveloped Hosono as he revealed his painful experiences. He closed his eyes and continued slowly. I was a broken man, wandering like a lost soul through the gloomy streets, no longer able to think clearly. The weight of condemnation pressed me down, and I lost sight of who I was and what was happening around me. It was a time of pain but also of emptiness that threatened to engulf me. Again, a moment of silence followed, until I hesitantly asked what happened next. One day I held a newspaper in my exhausted hands that contained a report about Bruce Ismay. Hosono continued with a faint glimmer of hope. The headlines were filled with harsh accusations. It seemed that he was going through the same ordeal as I was. In that moment, I felt that our fates were doubly intertwined, and on impulse, I decided to reach out to him. Soon after, we met here on the streets of London and shared our deep sorrow with each other. Together, we contemplated how to move forward with our lives. We were both aware that guilt was our greatest enemy. But how could we overcome this overwhelming feeling when so many lives had been lost, and the press and society accused us? To seek forgiveness, Bruce Ismay suddenly chimed in promisingly. Forgiveness. That is the crucial idea that gives us hope to at least partially alleviate this unbearable sense of guilt. Yes, Hosono confirmed. That's why both of us decided as a first step to contact someone who suffered the most from the Titanic tragedy. Namely, you, Ismay spoke with a trembling voice, staring at his drink on the table. Me? Why me? I blurted out, a bit taken aback. Because you are the sole survivor among the women who went down with the ship and lost their 2 sons. When Hosono spoke those words, they hit me like a lightning bolt to my heart. For a brief moment, I was overwhelmed by the images of the icy waves where I lost my sons. The dreadful cries of the other victims resurfaced in my mind. I quickly turned my gaze to Bruce Ismay and asked him to tell his story, hoping to dispel those images from my mind. Chapter 5. Bruce Ismay's Story. Mr. Ismay, would you also like to share your perspective with us? If I am correctly informed, you had something to do with the construction of the Titanic, is that correct? That's correct. I was the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line, the parent company of the Titanic, began Ismay hesitantly. In 1907, I commissioned the construction of the Titanic, among others. I had the vision of a fleet of ships that would be unmatched in size and luxury. The days before the maiden voyage of the Titanic were filled with excitement. On April 10, 1912, we departed from Southampton, beginning our journey to New York. I was not only a director, but also a passenger on board the proudest ship ever to sail the seas. I felt privileged and full of anticipation. However, the events that followed on that fateful night, on April 14th at 11:40 p.m., destroyed my life as I had known it. With a clouded gaze, Ismay continued. I could hardly believe it when I learned of the damage the Iceberg had caused. It was a moment that took my breath away because I was aware of how perilous the situation was for everyone on board, and that was not least because of my decision before the voyage to reduce the number of lifeboats. You made that decision? I interjected. Are you responsible for there being too few lifeboats? Why? I asked incredulously, my eyes narrowing. The number of lifeboats was reduced by us for various reasons, Ismay admitted meekly. To be honest, we firmly believed at the time that this ship was unsinkable. The Titanic was a technological marvel to us, and we were convinced it would be nearly indestructible. In our eagerness to design this extraordinary ship, we did not fully adhere to the regulations of the International Convention regarding the number of lifeboats. And yes, it is true that the ship's aesthetic design played a role in this decision. We were determined to enhance the exterior appearance of the Titanic. In our pursuit of elegance and prestige, we may have lost sight of the safety of the people on board. We believed that a larger number of lifeboats could potentially detract from the ship's elegant design. As Ismay admitted this, everything inside me clenched. He continued tonelessly. Today, looking back on that decision, I feel a profound sense of remorse and regret. I cannot deny that our miscalculation and fixation on aesthetics played a significant role in this tragedy. The blame weighs heavily on my shoulders. The pursuit of aesthetics and prestige should never be placed above the well-being and safety of people. For a moment I was at a loss for words. I didn't know how to respond to that. We all sipped our drinks pensively. Then I gathered myself and asked Ismay accusingly, "If you were so concerned about prestige back then you surely wanted the Titanic to reach New York as quickly as possible. So, are you also to blame for the ship traveling at excessive speed and colliding with the iceberg?" Clearing his throat, he explained cautiously, "I am aware that the press has made headlines by portraying the Titanic as a ship meant to set a speed record. However, It was not my intention to have the ship sail excessively fast to compete with others. The truth is that the captain had decided to navigate around an ice field that was farther south than usual. As a result, we had to increase our speed to make up for lost time. I wasn't sure if this information would mitigate his guilt or if I could believe him. The speed at which the Titanic was traveling at the time was in line with the standards, he emphasized. We didn't recklessly disregard safety. It was simply a tragic twist of fate that the ship struck an iceberg, which was recognized late due to the calm sea and lack of moonlight. Tell me how you experienced the last hours of the Titanic, I now wanted to know from him. Ismay took a deep breath. After the collision, I grappled with the enormous challenge of convincing passengers to leave their warm cabins and board the cold, hard lifeboats. The darkness of the night veiled the impending tragedy that would unfold in the next moments. I knew that every minute was precious, that the drama was unfolding relentlessly. My rank and influence bestowed upon me a responsibility I could not evade. So I raised my voice and used my authority to get as many people to safety as possible. It was a desperate race against time as the crew members and I desperately tried to guide as many as possible into the lifeboats. The voices of despair and fear echoed from all sides. With calm determination, I reassured women and children, convincing them to leave the ship. I understood that due to space limitations, we simply couldn't save everyone. But every glance into the eyes of a hopeful mother and a trusting child pushed me forward. I remember 2 children a man who identified himself as Mr. Hoffman handed to me at the last lifeboat. "Please take care of my sons," this man pleaded hastily. As soon as I had placed both crying children on the cold wooden benches, the father disappeared into the chaos. The 2 boys, one 2 years old and the other 4, would continue to haunt me later. At some point, I could no longer perceive any more women and children around me. When it became clear that the ship would soon sink, it was as if an inner voice spoke to me. "This is the moment, Ismay. You must go now." My hands trembled, and my eyes were blurred with tears. I knew there were still more people on deck who needed to be saved. It was a moment of inner struggle, and my survival instinct won. As I stepped into the swaying boat and looked out over the majestic deck of the Titanic, my senses were overwhelmed by unbearable guilt. The awareness of the fate of countless people now left to the icy sea weighed heavily on my shoulders. I saw the people still on the ship, and my eyes met their desperate faces. Then, with a groan, the Titanic finally sank into the waves, and with it, everyone left behind. It was a sight that shook me to my core, a fate that seemed inevitable despite all hope and effort. I had to look away. As my gaze lingered in the paralyzing darkness of the ocean, the death cries of those drowning echoed in my ears. In that moment, I was consumed by a sense of powerlessness and failure. The ship had disappeared, as had my sense of self and everything that defined me. On board the RMS Carpathia, the ship that had saved us survivors, I suffered a nervous breakdown, like so many others who had been rescued. The compassionate ship's doctor generously provided opium, and I retreated into a fog of numbness. Ismay's vacant eyes stared out of a cafe window. "What happened next?" I asked. He flinched briefly, then continued. "When I disembarked in New York, I was surrounded by an icy coldness of hatred and contempt. The piercing gazes of the reporters bored into my soul, and their words struck me like daggers. In their reports, I was depicted as a coward and an egotist who had saved himself while countless women and children had to drown. So did my sons," I whispered tonelessly. "Ismay, apparently overlooked my comment and continued unabated. The press was unanimous. I was held partially responsible for the decisions and actions during the Titanic disaster. Additionally, the White Star Line was blamed for the tragedy, as their goal was to set a speed record, which was said to have ultimately led to the accident. And as the leading figure of this company, I was portrayed in mocking caricatures as a symbol of negligence and greed. A few weeks after the tragedy, it was assumed that I had gone into hiding to avoid the accusing public. In reality, though, I tried everything to atone for my guilt and appease my remorse. I donated almost my entire fortune to the families of the victims, tirelessly advocated for the insurance claims of the bereaved, and was grateful for every pound I could procure for the widows and children. A meaningful gleam lit up Ismay's eyes as he continued. My final attempt at some semblance of peace of mind moved me particularly. I just mentioned 2 children whom a man handed to me at the last lifeboat. The children later became known as Lolo and Monmon, the orphans of the Titanic. Their father, Michel Navratil, had separated from his wife and attempted to abduct her sons to New York. There, he wanted to start a new life with them. However, Navratil died on the night of the disaster after entrusting his children to me. They were initially known as the sons of Mr. Hoffman because their father had used his friend Louis Hoffman's passport and had posed as Mr. Hoffman. This made the search for their relatives extremely difficult. The 2 boys, aged 2 and 4, did not know their true last name, only their nicknames, Lolo and Monmon. With passion and determination, I took it upon myself to find the mother of the orphaned children. Despite my strained relationship with the press, I recognized the power of media coverage. I ensured that their story, photos, and all available information about the children were published. I intensified the search for their identity and led a team of investigators. We posted announcements and coordinated information sharing with other survivors of the Titanic disaster. On an international level, I collaborated with authorities and organizations. Then, the unbelievable happened. Marcel Carreto Navratil, the mother of the children, recognized her beloved sons in a newspaper photo. Overwhelmed with emotions, she immediately traveled from Nice to New York to embrace them. I was very glad that I could assist in this poignant reunion. But the joy didn't last long. All my efforts and charity couldn't piece together the shards of my reputation. The press didn't pay attention to my deeds, which had been my life since the tragedy. They wanted to see the scapegoat in me. And so they gave me the nickname Bruce Ismay. Why this name? Hosono asked. Brute means beast. In the eyes of the press and therefore public opinion, I had behaved like a beast, selfish, greedy, and cowardly. I felt like an outcast, a pariah who would never find peace. Even the people who knew me well distanced themselves from me. The months following the disaster were a restless and desperate journey that seemed to lead me back into darkness. I said farewell to my profession and carried the burden of the Titanic disaster as if it were my constant companion. Guilt gnawed at me, like chains around my ankles, driving me to the brink of hopelessness. It seemed that only death could redeem my name. My existence was now linked only to my mistakes and omissions. People blamed me for the suffering buried in the depths of the ocean. And soon, I longed for nothing more than to disappear into that abyss myself. Tears streamed down Ismay's face, and we could all feel the emptiness that had spread in his heart. Then he looked up again. In the midst of my deepest despair, I received a letter from Japan. It was Hosono, going through his own inner struggles, who felt that we were connected in our suffering. His words touched my shattered soul and awakened in me the desire for comfort and understanding. I had nothing more to lose and decided to heed the call. So we arranged to meet in London. Even in our first meeting a few days ago, it became clear that we were both on the verge of suffocating under the weight of our guilt, and that we had to do something if we didn't want to perish. Why in London, specifically? I asked. Hosono explained that their correspondence had made it evident that the path to their inner peace inevitably led to me. I was, for them, the tragic icon of the Titanic disaster, the only woman who went down with the ship and survived, losing her 2 innocent sons in the process. Hosono and Ismay were deeply moved by the profound awareness that their places in the lifeboats were intended not for them, but for me and my children. Driven by genuine remorse and a profound understanding of the injustice I had suffered, they longed to meet me face to face and offer their apologies in a gesture of deep humility. With tears in his eyes, Hosono looked at me and whispered with a trembling voice, "Mrs. Abbott, I beg you to forgive us. We are infinitely sorry for having to remind you of the worst tragedy of your life with our request. The pain you endured is unimaginable to us, and it haunts us. It was a grave mistake on our part to board the lifeboats instead of you and your beloved sons. Our decision was driven by fear and selfishness, and for that we carry an incomprehensible guilt. There are no words that could adequately express how deeply sorry we are," Ismay added in a soft tone. "As the director of the White Star Line, I bear a special responsibility for all the failures that led to the death of your sons and the immense suffering you endured. Instead, it was an act of cowardice as I found myself in a lifeboat while you experienced the unimaginable. I implore you to accept my sincere remorse and humility, Mrs. Abbott." It took me a while before I could respond with a resigned voice. "I understand your sorrow, and your words reach my broken heart. But the pain I've been through is indescribable, and no apology can fully alleviate it." Ismay and Hosono swallowed hard and nodded in understanding. "But I will accept your sincere remorse because I hardly have any other choice," I continued. "We are all victims of this tragedy, and together we must find a way forward. May our souls find peace, and may we find solace in accepting our heavy past." With these words, the 3 of us embraced each other and comforted one another. It was a moving moment, and I knew that I had lifted a great burden from the 2 men. Chapter 6. The Engineer. Suddenly, a visibly intoxicated gentleman approached our table and interrupted our intimate embrace. "Excuse the disturbance," the man began, "but I've heard that you all experienced the Titanic tragedy. My condolences to all of you. There were so many ways to avert the disaster." "And who are you?" Ismay asked. The man introduced himself as James Richardson, a former manager and engineer at a Scottish shipbuilding company. He was convinced that the tragic Titanic catastrophe could have been prevented if only certain decisive measures had been taken. He continued to express his thoughts, though alcohol made him appear somewhat uncoordinated. The Titanic had many strong and watertight bulkheads, known as bulkheads. These bulkheads could have prevented water from entering the ship, but no one expected such a large hole in the ship's hull. The bulkheads didn't suffice for that. James Richardson also talked about Captain Edward Smith's fateful decision regarding the Titanic. The mistake was that Captain Edward Smith, may he rest in peace, wanted to steer clear of the dangerous Iceberg. Perhaps he could have succeeded if the ship hadn't been traveling so fast and if the Iceberg had been spotted earlier. But they underestimated the Iceberg, which, due to the collision, pushed the ship along its length, causing the rivets on the steel hull to come loose. This resulted in a much larger hole, and too many bulkheads were flooded. But what would have been the right course of action in that situation? He asked us, with bright eyes. Somewhat taken aback, We listened to the former ship engineer's explanations and awaited his answer as he took a big sip from his whiskey glass. It certainly wasn't his first. Normally, such ships are strong enough to withstand such collisions, Richardson explained earnestly. But the captain should have rammed the Iceberg head-on. That way, fewer compartments would have been flooded, and the ship wouldn't have sunk. Well, it did sink, and many people lost their lives, Ismay regretfully stated, indicating that he was hardly interested in Richardson's exposition. I know, please forgive me. I've seen what you all have to go through. That for you, it's all about figuring out how to continue your lives after this tragedy, Richardson said meekly. That's right, confirmed Hosono. Mrs. Abbott's current life consists solely of coping with the unimaginable loss of her sons. She also witnessed the Titanic's sinking up close and is still mentally and physically scarred by it. As for Ismay and me, we're struggling with how we can even look ourselves in the mirror. Our guilt weighs on us every day, Ismay added. We feel like prisoners of our self-blame, and we can hardly bear the gaze of our fellow men. We sense their hatred and contempt towards us. We have no more energy left. We're tired of this life. Their words expressed the broken state that Ismay and Hosono had reached. It's hard to bear that we had the opportunity to survive while so many innocent women and children had to lose their lives, Hosono continued. We wish we could have been in their place. The sadness and despair in their voices were palpable. But what can we do, other than apologize to survivors like Mrs. Abbott? Ismay asked desperately, helplessness in his eyes. At that moment, it seemed there was no answer to their tormenting questions, no way to atone for their guilt and conquer their inner demons. Suddenly, Hosono whispered with a serious expression, "We should apologize to the dead." His soft words echoed in the silence of the cafe as we waited in anticipation of his explanation. Reflectively, he began to reveal his reasons. The dead lost their lives due to our decisions and actions. Their voices have been silenced. Their hopes and dreams were abruptly ended. We bear immense responsibility for their fate. It is our duty to show remorse and ask for forgiveness. Hosono's tone grew more emphatic. We must reconcile with the spirits of the dead. Their presence and unfulfilled longings will haunt us until we receive absolution from them. Only through their forgiveness can our own spirits find peace, and we can find inner peace. A tear rolled down his face. Hosono is right, Ismay affirmed. We will only be able to make a fresh start if we apologize to the dead. By remembering them and seeking forgiveness, we commit to learning from the past and changing our future actions. It wouldn't just be a gesture, but also a way to rediscover our own humanity. Yes, it could. No, it must be the decisive step toward healing. Convinced, Hosono nodded. If we work to ensure that such tragedies do not happen again, thereby honoring the memory of the Titanic's victims, we might indeed find our peace again. Richardson cleared his throat loudly. Perhaps I can help you with that, he said. How? Ismay inquired. I can take you to the spirits of the Titanic. The eyes of the former ship engineer sparkled. Are you a spiritualist? Do you speak to the dead? How do you intend to do this? I asked skeptically. Not at all. I'm an engineer. I'm a scientist. But allow me to explain if you'll permit me. Without waiting for a response from us, Richardson began to tell his story. When I worked as an assistant manager at Scott's Shipbuilding and Engineering Company, I had big dreams and plans. My heart beat for shipbuilding, specifically submarines. I firmly believed that with my passion and technical skills, I could achieve something great. In 1916, I had a groundbreaking idea, a snorkel system for submarines that would revolutionize underwater technology. With determination and tireless dedication, I embarked on developing this snorkel system. I worked day and night, perfecting every single component. It was a painstaking and lengthy task that demanded all my physical and mental strength. Every step along this path was accompanied by enormous financial expenses that burdened the company heavily. I also invested my own savings, took out loans, and even asked friends and family for support because I was so passionate about this project. I couldn't bear the thought of my vision failing due to lack of funds. So, I continued to fight, even though the financial strain threatened my livelihood. When the snorkel system finally took shape, I was filled with confidence, convinced that I had created a groundbreaking innovation. This system promised to radically change the efficiency of submarines in every way, redefining the boundaries of underwater exploration. It could have significantly extended dives by improving onboard air supply. Longer dive times without resurfacing for air intake would have allowed for extended missions at greater depths and distances. We also utilized new high-strength materials, enabling dives into extremely deep underwater regions that were previously entirely inaccessible. Additionally, the system offered improved noise suppression, allowing submarines to operate more quietly and discreetly. They could have approached enemy lines or highly sensitive underwater ecosystems entirely unnoticed. This snorkel system would have ushered in a new era of underwater exploration and fundamentally altered the future of submarine technology. The idea that my invention could contribute to improving the safety and performance of these ships filled me with pride and joy. But then came the devastating moment when the British Navy rejected our innovation. It was as if someone had shattered my hopes with a single blow. My heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. I couldn't believe it. The Navy had no idea how much work, dedication, and sacrifice had gone into my system. What was the reason for the rejection? Ismay asked. The Navy deemed my snorkel system too risky, Richardson explained. It didn't meet the high safety standards they demanded for submarines. A central issue for them stemmed from the pipes we installed. There was already an innovative submarine with pipes running in front and behind the conning tower. One pipe was meant to vent toxic gases from the battery compartment, while the other brought fresh air to the entire submarine. However, it had been found that the valves in these pipes were unreliable. This, under certain conditions, led to water entering the battery compartment, releasing dangerous gases. Since the existing pipes and valves were already causing problems, the Navy was concerned that introducing a new snorkel system with additional pipes and valves could exacerbate the problem and jeopardize the safety of submarines. But it was all nonsense. I'm absolutely sure that my design would have worked flawlessly. However, to avoid increasing the risk from their perspective, my system was simply rejected. It seemed like they didn't understand my vision and failed to recognize the potential of my invention. That must have been very tough for you, Hosono empathetically remarked. Yes, the setback hit me hard, Richardson confirmed. It was a devastating blow to my professional and personal development. The rejection of my innovation caused my self-confidence to wane, and my passion for shipbuilding began to fade. I doubted my abilities and feared that I would never achieve anything significant in shipbuilding again. The company, burdened by me with financial trouble, promptly dismissed me, and the private debts I incurred with banks, friends, and family at that time still weigh me down to this day. I may never be able to repay them. That's why everyone has turned their back on me. Richardson emptied his whiskey glass and ordered another one. And that's why you're drowning your sorrows in alcohol now, I remarked sarcastically. He swallowed and emphasized, Alcohol can save lives. Haven't you heard the story of the Titanic's head baker, Charles Juin? He went down with the Titanic and survived only because he had drunk 2 bottles of whiskey beforehand. While others froze in the icy water within 15 minutes, he could endure for 2 hours thanks to the alcohol. In the end, he only had swollen feet. Richardson paused briefly. But you're right. We need a clear head for our endeavor. Our endeavor? Ismay asked. I'm going to dive to the Titanic. Richardson unexpectedly exclaimed loudly, and the 3 of us briefly lowered our heads in embarrassment as the sound of his words echoed through the entire cafe. Because I need to prove to the world that my snorkel system works. I won't give up. I know I've created something truly great. And how do you plan to do that? You don't work for the shipbuilding company anymore. Do you have your own submarine? Ismay asked skeptically. It's possible that I haven't returned all the company's keys yet, Richardson replied with a wink. Why do you want to go to the Titanic specifically? Hosono asked. Because everyone knows the sunken Titanic, Richardson smiled. If I can successfully complete a dive to the Titanic with my submarine, and I have absolute confidence in that, then everyone will know me, and with me, my submarine innovation. Then I'll be back in business, he boasted with a radiant face. And you can all come along. A long silence followed. Eventually, Richardson continued. There's just one catch. And what would that be? Hosono asked. A special ship needs to transport the submarine to the right location. I know a captain who owes me a favor. He would position the ship, along with us and the submarine, over the sunken Titanic. However, it would cost a bit of money. My attention gradually waned as I had no intention of participating in this expedition. After all, I owed nothing to anyone. My suffering was of a different nature than that of these men. And so I bid farewell to the gentlemen. Hosono and Ismay stood up and shook my hand with the utmost respect, expressing their deep regret once again. I now understood their dilemma and their suffering. Even though it didn't benefit me in my situation, I let them feel with a firm embrace that I accepted their apology. I sincerely wished that this meeting could be the first successful step toward a kind of absolution for the 2 of them. I hoped that they could soon lead peaceful lives, free from the burden of public opinion. Chapter 7. A Wish Takes Shape. The days passed, and I noticed how the meeting with the 3 men increasingly occupied my thoughts. Initially, I saw no reason to dive down to the Titanic with Richardson's submarine. I had no guilt to reconcile with anyone. However, in the following nights, the dreams of the tragedy began to intensify once more. I kept hearing the voices of my 2 sons, who were swept away by the icy waves. It seemed as though they had something important left to tell me. My subconscious mind struggled to figure out what that could be. The pain returned, and it felt like I was sinking into an endless sea of grief. I began to curse the meeting with the men. The desperate longing to be close to my children returned. I wanted to feel them in my arms once more, or at least hear what they wanted to tell me just before their end in the raging sea. What burdened me even more was the growing sense of estrangement from my sons, who were so suddenly torn from my life. An unfathomable emptiness surrounded me once again. This situation was unbearable for my husband George, and I couldn't allow it. I had to do something. And so, the desire to dive into the depths of the ocean was born within me. Suddenly, it seemed to be the only way to keep the precious memory of my children alive within me. Diving to the Titanic would allow me to be as close as possible to my sons, to feel connected to them even though they were no longer with me physically. George, who witnessed how grief was once again overwhelming me, encouraged me. He believed that the journey into the depths of the ocean could be a kind of therapeutic release. By confronting the tragedy at its location, he saw the opportunity for me to process at least a part of my grief. I saw the chance to finally find answers about the unknown fate of my children. Perhaps the dive could help me learn what exactly had happened to them that night and what they wanted to say to me in their final minutes. With all these compelling reasons and a mix of courage and desperation, I contacted Ismay and arranged to meet him again at Café Royal. When I told him my intention there, he initially seemed somewhat surprised. However, he then explained how the plans of the three men had hit a roadblock. Richardson recently met with Captain Maurice Fitzgerald, the captain who is supposed to take the submarine to the right location. Unfortunately, the money raised so far is not enough for the captain. Moreover, Richardson's promising prospects of a successful submarine expedition, which would bring wealth and fame aplenty, fall on deaf ears with him. Otherwise, we have no one else who can take us there without drawing too much attention. It seems that our venture may possibly never happen, Ismay said, his red eyes betraying his dejection. His alcohol-laden breath indicated that he had been drowning his sorrows in the past nights. His suffering moved me so deeply in that moment that on impulse, I promised to raise the remaining funds on the condition that I would be part of the expedition. Chapter 8. Dark Memories. A few days later, I received a telegram stating that the transport ship would depart from Greenock, Scotland in 2 weeks. In the days leading up to my departure to Scotland, my thoughts were consumed by my sons and their final moments aboard the Titanic before we lost each other in the cold waters. The pain in my heart became unbearable once again, and I sank into a deep melancholy. At the same time, anticipation and longing for the day when we would all hover in the submarine above the wreckage of the Titanic grew within me. And then came the day when I stood with Hosono, Ismay, and Richardson at the railing of the humming transport ship, gazing thoughtfully out at the open sea. Captain Fitzgerald sat disinterestedly in his pilot house and exchanged few words with any of us. His expression revealed little enthusiasm for our venture, as if it were just another routine task he intended to complete without much emotion. We slowly approached the site of the disaster, with the tethered submarine creaking behind us, awaiting its deployment. It was a mission of utmost importance to all of us, yet we were unsure if it could truly provide the closure we all sought. Only Richardson's cheerful demeanor revealed his unwavering belief in the success of his submarine mission. "How were you able to raise the remaining funds for our journey?" he asked me gratefully. "The majority of it came from the Titanic Relief Fund," I replied dryly. "Every victim received financial support. It's amazing how many people from around the world donated to it. Unlike Hosono and Ismay, I can't complain about society. Another part of the money came from my husband. He sees this expedition as an opportunity for me to find peace." We continued to stare motionlessly towards the horizon. "I never had much money before," I continued without being prompted. "My first husband was a successful professional boxer in the United States. But we separated, and I moved to England with our 2 sons, Rossmore and Eugene. I worked there as a seamstress and with the Salvation Army. My sons, however, didn't like it in England and wanted to return to the USA. So, we planned our journey back. Originally, I had purchased inexpensive tickets for the Philadelphia, but we were fortunate, or rather unfortunate as it turned out, to be transferred to the Titanic due to the English coal strike. We were elated that we could travel on this luxurious and famous ship." I had to pause for a moment. Oh, if only there had never been that coal strike. I swallowed hard. And yet, I will never forget how at ease I felt on the Titanic's deck. I'm somewhat ashamed to admit it now because it sounds so inappropriate in hindsight. But yes, rarely had I felt as good as I did during those 4 days before the disaster. All the worries and fears about the uncertain future in America were blown away. Every day I found my place in the same deck chair, surrounded by the cheerful atmosphere of the other passengers. While my sons played with other children they had met on deck, I simply enjoyed the sun. At noon, I would drift into a gentle, sweet sleep. It was as if the ocean's whispers lulled me into a blissful slumber. However, despite all these wonderful memories, April 14th, 1912 remains a mysterious puzzle piece in my memory. Like the days before, I enjoyed the sunny hours on the deck. But I can't remember how I woke up on the sun deck. Instead, I suddenly found myself in our cabin when loud, urgent knocking shattered my blissful rest. It was night, the night of the tragedy as it quickly became apparent. Our cabin was so far from the Iceberg collision site that we weren't awakened by the impact, but rather by a ship's crew member urgently pounding on our door. At that point, the ship was already in chaos. It was just past midnight when we were forced upstairs. Only women and children were allowed to proceed to the rear boat deck. In the midst of the second-class lounge, more and more people gathered, who, in their panic, began to pray. The terrible situation on the Titanic made us despair, and I could hear the fear in Rossmore's voice as he too began to quietly pray. He begged that my life be spared, even if he and his brother Eugene were not to be saved. It was a touching moment. We clung to each other and hoped desperately for a miracle in this dark hour. Then, indeed, Officer Charles Lightoller offered me a place in a lifeboat. But I had to decline because my boys, aged 13 and 16, might have been counted as men rather than children. Leaving my sons alone on the sinking ship was not an option for me. Around 2 o'clock in the morning, the Titanic broke in two. We were thrown into the sea. In the dark, icy waters, I lost my grip on my sons and never saw them again. The hope for my own survival was minimal as I was pulled from the water and placed in a collapsible lifeboat filled with water. The boat was overcrowded, and the water reached our knees. About 20 survivors fought against the deadly cold for their lives. Only 13 of us survived the night. I was unconscious when the rescue ship approached and picked us up. Later, I learned that I was the only woman who could be saved alive from the icy waters. Rossmore's body was recovered and buried at sea, while Eugene's body was unfortunately never found. I still remember that my sons shouted something to me just before they were swept away by the icy waves. To this day, I wonder what it could have been. Perhaps that's why I'm here today. Perhaps this expedition can provide me with an answer. But the truth is, I simply want to be close to my sons again. Chapter 9. The Arrival. I can't recall whether my words were merely thoughts or if I actually shared them with the others. Throughout the entire journey, we were lost in our own thoughts, enveloped in a melancholic haze. Eventually, the ship's bell roused me, and I walked over to the railing. Richardson and Captain Fitzgerald detached the submersible from its moorings and prepared it for the dive. Hosono spotted me and informed me that we were now at the spot where the Titanic had gone down. A shiver ran down my spine, and for a brief moment, I could hear the cries that had echoed here about 4 years ago across the dark ocean. As we boarded the cramped submersible, and Richardson eagerly sealed the hatches with a resounding clank before starting the engines, I felt a mixture of sorrow and fear. In contrast, Hosono and Ismay seemed to be slipping into a joyful trance. Their heavy hearts carried the memories of those who had lost their lives here, but also the great hope of finally finding peace and reconciliation. The sounds of the surface were gradually replaced by a soothing silence. Only the faint hum of the machinery and the gentle gurgling of the water around the submersible could be heard. I could feel the depths of the ocean expanding above us, drawing us into its embracing darkness. The instruments and controls before me were bathed in a soft green light, illuminating the contours of the cabin. The submersible glided gracefully through the water, as if it were a living being seeking to unveil the secrets of the sea. In the stillness, I could hear the echo of our own breathing, resonating rhythmically in the cabin. Each breath felt more profound, as if in this moment I could establish a deeper connection to the world around me. Time seemed to lose its significance in this underwater realm. Minutes felt like hours, and I became lost in contemplation of the unknown that awaited us. The submersible was our vessel into another dimension, a world that few had ever seen. With every meter we descended, our curiosity heightened, but so did a profound unease that permeated our thoughts and emotions. After an eternity of anticipation, the weathered wreck of the Titanic suddenly unfolded before our eyes, shrouded in a shimmering cloak of algae and silt. In that moment, the world seemed to stand still as we grasped the profound significance of this sight, a monument to the fate that had befallen so many people there. Our hearts swelled with reverence and humility in the face of the history these remains held within them. Tears of solemnity streamed down our cheeks as the full weight of the past tragedy struck us once again. Chapter 10. The Sun's Final Words. My sons and I stand on the now slanting deck of the majestic Titanic when the bow suddenly dips downward and the ship is swallowed by a roaring wave. The icy embrace of the water strikes me suddenly and unrelentingly. It pierces through my clothes and touches my skin like 1,000 needles. A sharp gasp escapes me as the frigid water surprises me and steals away all warmth. A moment of paralysis seizes me as I frantically try to hold my sons close and protect them. The desperation and fear of the people nearby are palpable, yet there is an eerie silence as we perceive the creeping creaking and the muffled rumbling of the fragile ship. Suddenly, my hand is seized by a merciless tug as a roaring vortex suddenly pulls us into the depths. Horrified, I feel the firm grip of my fingers loosen, and I must watch as my 2 boys are carried away amidst the raging chaos. Rossmore! Eugene! My own cry echoes in my ears, a desperate call swallowed by the power of the waves. I try to fight my way through the confusion, stretch out my cold arms, and can only perceive how the darkness of the night and the agitated masses of water engulf my children before my eyes. My desperate cries get lost in the infernal sound of the storm, and I feel like a tiny plaything in the merciless power of the forces of nature. The sea seems to have conspired against me, and I am just a tiny dot in its relentless game. And then, like a whisper in the hurricane, their voices reach me. The words of my sons calling out to me in the raging whirlpool, "Come back, come back." The words echo in my heart, a last desperate attempt to reach me before the waves swallow them. I would give anything to reach them, to hold them in my arms and protect them from this tremendous force. But the darkness is impenetrable, the waves unstoppable. My sons are gone, torn away from me on that terrible night. I am left behind with the echo of their words echoing in my heart. Come back! Come back! In the corner of my eye, the green lights of the submarine blur. My gaze detaches from the wreckage of the Titanic and wanders into the depths of the ocean. Relief washes over me. Finally, I know what my sons were still calling out to me before they were swallowed by the waves. A euphoric feeling suddenly surges within me, apparently triggered by the realization I've been searching for so long. I hear my own whisper, I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm so, so sorry. But now I'm back. Now I'm with you again. I'm here. Chapter 11. Something is amiss. Amid an increasingly intense state of ecstasy, I slowly turn my head towards Ismay and Hosono. Their faces stare out from the hatches, trapped in a state that feels like catharsis. It's a strange, cold sight, yet it radiates an odd sense of calm and solace. I get the impression that they too are currently touched by a liberating revelation, as if the spirits of the Titanic were forgiving them at this very moment, freeing them from the burden of guilt. A guilt that the world has placed upon their shoulders over the sea. A gentle, relaxed smile finds its way onto my face. As my senses slowly descend into the haze of exhaustion and darkness, I become aware of Richardson beside me. His figure appears as a flickering silhouette in the subdued lighting of the submarine. With frantic movements, he operates the switches, levers, and buttons that surround us. My gaze briefly falls on his hands, which dart over the controls as if caught in a desperate dance. Suddenly, my consciousness is struck by a moment of terror. I feel my perception become crystal clear for a fraction of a second as I look into Richardson's face. His eyes, which were previously so confident and focused, are now wide open, filled with fear and panic. A dark shadow of impending doom seems to reflect in them, and I can almost feel the pounding of his anxious heart. But before I can read more from those eyes, I lose myself again in my own thoughts, enveloped in a numbing fog. The world around me turns into a blurry mosaic of sounds and impressions. A peculiar scent fills my nose. The instruments around us light up and howl in a chaotic sea of lights, reflecting the intricate interplay of mechanisms. All of this becomes a blurred symphony of sounds, aromas, and movements for my senses, dissipating in my consciousness. I must close my eyes because the ever-brightening light from the many displays blinds me. Chapter 12. Back again. I can't open my eyes for a long time because there is this dazzling light pouring in front of me. It's pleasantly warm. Simultaneously, I suddenly perceive a fresh sea breeze. Gradually, I recognize, blinking, that the light is coming from sparkling reflections of the sun on the sea. It takes me a while to realize that I'm sitting on a deck chair, on my deck chair amidst the bustling activity on the Titanic's deck. A feeling of familiarity, but also deep wonderment, washes over me as if I've awoken from a nightmare. But can this be real? Am I really here? At first, I can't even gather my thoughts. The atmosphere pulsates with activity. Happy conversations hang in the air, accompanied by the sound of glasses and the faint clattering of dishes from the restaurants. Passengers in their elegant attire stroll along the promenade deck, breathing in the salty sea breeze. The ship's band music harmoniously melds with the sound of the waves, creating a magical aura of grace and lightness. I stand up sleepily and take a few steps. Inside the ship is equally lively. In salons and at bars, people exchange stories, laugh, and savor the luxury of the voyage. I smell the delicious meals tantalizing the passengers' palates. The crew works tirelessly in the background to ensure the smooth operation of the ship. The engines rumble and hum as the ship proudly glides through the waves. Sailors vigilantly watch over safety while keeping an eye out for icebergs. Amidst this vibrant backdrop, I stand filled with deep astonishment. The past and the present blur in a feeling of confusion. Was everything that happened before just a dream? Did the Titanic really sink, or did it only sink in my dreams? The question echoes in my mind repeatedly as I lose myself in this incredible reality that seems so unexplainable and surreal. I believe we've been given a second chance. I suddenly hear a familiar voice beside me. My features relax as I recognize Masabumi Hosono. Hosono! I exclaim, my heart racing with surprise. I can't make sense of the world anymore. How can this be? What are we doing here? What's happening? A gentle smile forms on Hosono's face as his eyes reflect a mixture of relief and disbelief. I know it's hard to grasp, he replies calmly. But we are indeed on the Titanic, before it sank. It's a kind of second reality. His words whirl through my mind. I stare at him, confusion and amazement spreading within me. A second reality? How can that be possible? I was on the Titanic when it sank. I saw everything. Hosono nods sympathetically. I know it's hard to comprehend, but I've been on board for several hours. What I saw then is the same as what I'm seeing now. Everything is the same, and everything is still here. I believe we somehow traveled back in time to when the Titanic hadn't sunk yet. I stare at him in disbelief, my mind reeling with the paradoxical thoughts rising within it. A flood of questions rushes over me. So, what do we do now? Why were we brought here? Can we change anything? My thoughts race. Hosono takes a deep breath, his eyes scanning the deck as if searching for answers. I don't know exactly, he admits, but I have a feeling that we have an opportunity to do things differently. Maybe we can prevent it. The sun glistens on the deck as lively passenger activity unfolds before us. I sense how the boundaries between dream and reality blur, how time itself seems to stretch and bend. A second chance, I whisper, more to myself than to Hosono. A chance to prevent it. Without looking at Hosono again, an impulsive urge takes over me. My mind goes blank, and I rush forward, through the ship's corridors, with a pounding heart and a burning desire to see my sons again. The hallways stretch before me like a labyrinth as I stumble through them, past passers-by in elegant attire. I can't hear my own footsteps. My pulse roars in my ears. The rush of thoughts drowns out every other sound. I rush past elegantly dressed ladies, hurry past chatty groups filled with anticipation, and run past waiters rushing with trays of delicacies. The hallways blur into a whirl of colors, fabrics, and faces as I race forward, driven by an insatiable longing to find my children. I dash into elevators, ride them up and down, climb up and down staircases as if time itself were working against me. The ship seems infinitely large, an endless maze of cabins and corridors that seem to vanish into infinite expanse. Time loses its meaning, and my focus is solely on one thought: finding my sons. Then, after what feels like an eternity of rushing and searching, I finally stand in front of a cabin door. Our cabin door. I can hear muted children's voices. A wave of relief and hope floods over me as I hold my breath and fixate on the door. I feel the cool handle in my hand as I press it down and swing the door open with a jerk. And there they are, my sons, before me, in their innocence and childlike radiance. They stand there, smiling at me, ready to go to dinner. The moment is so unreal, so surreal, that my heart stops for a moment. Tears of joy and confusion mix on my cheeks as I throw myself into their arms and hold them tightly. "Mama, what's wrong?" they ask, bewildered and concerned. Their voices are real. Their touch is real. The smiles on their faces are real. I can feel the warmth of their bodies, their heartbeats, seemingly in sync with my own. In this moment, I'm lost in the unparalleled reality of what lies before me. The world around me bathes in a bright light as I hold my children, pressing them close and feeling the unconditional love flowing between us. And in this embrace, I find solace and peace, a timeless merging of past, present, and future that exists only in this moment. I'm back. I'm with you again. I'm here. I sob, barely audibly, but overflowing with happiness. Amid my joy at the reunion, I sense that my sons are surprised and frightened by my excessive emotion. They exchange questioning glances as if they suspect that something isn't right. A pang of realization shoots through me. I can't just reveal everything I know, everything I've experienced. Not now, not here. With a gentle smile, I try to ease the confusion in their eyes. "Nothing, my loves," I reply in as normal and composed a voice as possible. "I just missed you, that's all." The skepticism lingers in their eyes, but they seem content to accept that their mother was simply overcome by a longing for them. It's strange how much I long to tell the truth in this moment, to tell them about my experiences, about the reality I know. Yet I silently admonish myself to remain silent. This moment is too precious. I can't risk anything. After all, I don't know how fragile this second chance is. "How about a special dinner?" I suddenly ask, hoping to divert their thoughts. "We could go to the most expensive restaurant on board, have a proper fancy meal." My sons' eyes light up, and broad smiles spread across their faces. "In the grand dining room? Really, Mama?" The younger one of them, Eugene, asks with a hint of disbelief. "Yes, really. Today is a special day, and I want us to celebrate it properly," I reply cheerfully. "But how can we afford it?" Rossmore questions critically. "Let me worry about that." I wave off. I don't care about anything as long as I can cherish the time with the boys. What if it's their last evening again? So, we get dressed up for the Titanic's main restaurant, and I discreetly retrieve all our savings from the cabin safe. The thought of visiting such a luxurious restaurant is clearly surprising but enticing to my sons. As we make our way there, I sense their excitement and anticipation. The darkness of my experiences fades for a moment as I focus on experiencing this precious moment with my sons. Upon arriving at the restaurant, I feel their curiosity as they take in the elegant decor and the subdued music. We order exquisite dishes and share stories, as if we're simply having a very special family evening. My sons' faces beam with delight as the courses are served. They savor the delicate dishes they rarely get to enjoy. I watch them with a warm heart as they wholeheartedly indulge in their meals. This moment of family togetherness is the most valuable gift I can imagine. Sitting in the restaurant's silence, I feel the presence of my sons beside me and can hardly believe that they are really here. Although I know I can't share everything I've experienced, I am determined to enjoy this moment to the fullest. I make an effort to conceal my true mental state and focus on making the evening as normal and beautiful as possible, alongside my two children in this second chance fate has granted me. I repeatedly wipe my tears away inconspicuously with the napkin. Chapter 13. The Chance to Prevent It. As the entertainment program in the grand dining room kicks off with theater and music, I suddenly notice Hosono and Ismay from the corner of my eye. They are sitting at a table a few meters away, gazing intently in my direction. My sons are fascinated by the ship's orchestra and are watching the show with rapt attention. I whisper to them that I'll be chatting with some friends at another table for a while. This isn't out of the ordinary for them, as we've met many passengers during the voyage and often engaged in conversations with others. I tell them they don't need to wait for me and should go to bed on their own when they get tired. Nervously, I make my way to the two men. Both of them embrace me as I arrive at their table, and Hosono offers me the seat next to him. None of us can believe that we are indeed on the still intact Titanic. "So these are your charming sons," Ismay remarks, smiling warmly. I shake my head slightly, my thoughts still swirling in confusion and disbelief. "How can this be?" I ask, unable to put into words what has just transpired. Ismay explains that something must have happened in the submarine that has placed us in this inexplicable situation. "And Richardson?" I ask with concern. Hosono shakes his head. "I haven't seen him during my explorations. He was never on the Titanic, so theoretically he can't be here either." His words confirm my fears. Richardson apparently isn't here to explain the situation to us or assist us. "We need to quickly figure out how to prevent the disaster. We don't have much time," Ismay urges, his expression grave. The gravity of the situation weighs on all of us. But who's to say that the disaster has to happen at all? I try to ignite a tiny spark of hope. Perhaps this Titanic will never strike an iceberg. Maybe this voyage will go exactly as planned. I glance worriedly at my unsuspecting children, who are amusedly watching the ongoing theatrical performance. Hosono remains undeterred by my words. Today is April 14th, 1912. I remember this evening vividly. Everything I've seen since my arrival about 4 hours ago aligns with the events of that time. I recognize the people, the music, and even the food. It's all the same. Ismay nods in agreement. I have to agree with him. Everything is unfolding just like it did back then. I arrived around the same time as Hosono and have already been on the captain's bridge. There are the same telegraphed iceberg warnings as before. No one here has any idea what's going to happen in a few hours, and once again there are far too few lifeboats. So we must prevent the collision. Hosono lists crucial factors that could have led to the catastrophe in the alternate reality. The Titanic is sailing at high speed through a known icy area. Despite warnings, insufficient measures are taken to mitigate the danger. Additionally, the crew might not be using binoculars adequately to spot icebergs early, impairing their ability to react in time. And the wireless operators on board could miss vital iceberg warnings due to being too preoccupied with passenger messages. At least, that's what I read in the newspaper. "I'll take care of that," Ismay declares decisively, rises from his seat and heads toward the bridge. Hosono and I exchange a brief look before following him. Chapter 14. A New Course. Our footsteps echo in the long corridor as we approach the bridge of the ship. The door opens before us, and we enter the room where navigation commands are given. The instrument panels glow in a diffuse light, and the sounds of instructions and communication devices fill the air. Ismay stops, and we follow his gaze to the officers who fulfill their duties with concentrated focus. The figures in their uniforms move like a well-oiled machine. Ismay steps forward, filling the room with his authoritative voice, radiating determination and seriousness. The officers respectfully direct their attention to him, realizing that the director of the shipping company stands before them. He explains the urgency of the situation in clear words, without delving too deep into specifics. He gestures toward the sea chart displaying the Titanic's course and the telegraphed iceberg warnings. Emphasizing the importance of reducing speed, he orders the use of all available binoculars and crew members to spot icebergs in a timely manner. As he speaks, I observe the first officer, whom I identify from newspaper articles as William Murdoch, signaling his colleagues to implement the instructions immediately. Within moments, the deck becomes a frantic hub of activity. Crew members hastily retrieve binoculars from equipment cabinets, every lens carefully polished for optimal clarity. They strategically position themselves along the railing, their vigilant eyes scanning the now dark expanse of the sea. The night air is crisp, carrying a hint of tension, while the ship continues its journey, its path illuminated by faintly glowing lanterns. Down in the heart of the steamer, communication is swift and precise. Orders are relayed from the bridge to the engine room through a series of telegraph messages. Experienced engineers monitor pressure gauges and levers, promptly responding to the call for reduced speed. Steam hisses, machines hum, and the rhythm of the Titanic's powerful engines adjusts to the new instructions. On the bridge, Ismay's voice remains calm as he oversees and coordinates all proceedings. He directs the officers to relay messages to the lookout posts, ensuring that no potential danger is overlooked. The clattering of machines and telegraphs, along with the voices of the crew, merges with the lapping of waves against the hull, creating an atmosphere of restlessness and anticipation. Chapter 15. Clash of Authorities. Suddenly, a deep, booming voice fills the room, capturing the attention of all present. Why the hell is the ship suddenly slowing down? And why the hell are so many crew members on the lookout posts? Captain Edward John Smith enters the bridge. His presence is imposing, his gaze stern, and his aura exudes authority, intimidating those around him. Ismay pauses for a moment, and the tension in the air becomes palpable. The captain scrutinizes Ismay, Hosono, and me with a skeptical expression. "Mr. Ismay, what are you doing here? And who are these people?" He directs his gaze at William Murdoch, the first officer. "Can you explain what's going on here?" he demands with an authoritative voice. The bridge falls into an uncomfortable silence. Before Murdoch can even open his mouth, Ismay takes a step forward and speaks with a mix of respect and determination. "Captain Smith, allow me to introduce you to my companions." He gestures to me and Hosono. "These are employees of the White Star Line's safety inspection, Mrs. Rhoda Abbott and Mr. Masabumi Hosono," he quickly invents. The captain casts a brief but appraising glance at us before fixing Ismay with an intense gaze. "Mr. Ismay, it is not customary for you to be on the bridge and involve yourself in operational decisions." His voice is sharp, and an unspoken demand lingers in his words. Ismay maintains his composure and responds with a touch of conviction. "Captain, I understand your position. But considering the current situation and the risks we are facing, I believe it is of the utmost importance that we take proactive action." The captain furrows his brow and continues to scrutinize Ismay with his piercing eyes. "And what risks are those, Mr. Ismay?" His voice sounds skeptical, but also curious. Ismay chooses his words carefully. "It concerns potential obstacles on our route. Icebergs. We have reason to believe they could pose a serious threat." Ismay attempts to conceal his unease, but the gravity of the situation is clearly evident in his voice. However, the captain shows little enthusiasm for Ismay's plan. His eyebrows knit together as he gazes at Ismay. "Our speed and course are meticulously planned." His voice is filled with unwavering determination. "I have clear instructions from the White Star Line to get the Titanic to New York as quickly as possible. And you, of all people, should know that the Titanic is the safest ship of all time. So why all this drama?" Ismay stands unwavering, his demeanor resolute. "I understand your responsibility, Captain," he replies in a tone that conveys respect, but also determination. "But please consider what we have before us. The safety of the passengers is at stake. I trust that you understand the weight of this responsibility." The discussion between Ismay and the captain escalates into a heated exchange of words. The officers look nervously from one to another as they observe this unusual scene on the bridge. Ismay passionately argues for his cause, while the captain remains skeptical and emphasizes his authority. After an intense debate, the captain eventually relents. He sighs as he realizes that Ismay's determination is not easily shaken. He reluctantly nods and states, "Very well, do as you see fit. But you will bear all responsibility before the White Star Line if we fail to meet our objectives." "I will do so, of course." Ismay responds with a hint of relief and thanks the captain for his cooperation. He explains to the officers and the captain all the further steps they should take to minimize the danger. Throughout, he emphasizes that the lives of the passengers are at stake and that they bear the responsibility of safely delivering them to New York. The atmosphere on the bridge shifts from tension to professional activity. The officers diligently continue their work, while the captain gazes thoughtfully at the sea chart. Every action is now aimed at steering the Titanic onto a safe course. The captain, though skeptical, stands behind this decision. He and Ismay now jointly command the situation. The bridge becomes the scene of determined coordination to avert the impending disaster. As the crew focuses on their tasks, the night seems endless. Every minute carries weight, and every decision could alter the course of history. Ismay's instructions permeate the ship, from the vigilant eyes of the lookout posts to the engineers deep within the Titanic's hull. He continuously points at the chart as the ship continues to sail. I stand beside Hosono, marveling at this intricate interplay of action and reaction. A feeling of indescribable hope washes over me as joy pulses through me like a warm river. Ismay's and Hosono's daring to rewrite history is set in motion, and within me, the conviction blossoms that a new, radiant future awaits the ship and us. Chapter 16. The Nightmare. Then a blissful longing to be with my children overtakes me. Since I can no longer make a difference on the bridge, I briefly say my farewells to Ismay and Hosono. On my way back to my cabin, a mixture of joy and disbelief envelops me. I smile at all the passengers who cross my path and freeze for a moment to grasp the reality of the situation. Occasionally, in solitary moments, I pinch my cheek in the hope that this isn't just a wonderful dream. In a silent plea to the universe, I whisper, "Please don't let me wake up." As I enter the cabin, I see that Rossmore and Eugen are already in their beds, reading a book together. Tears well up in my eyes as I thank the heavens infinitely for allowing me to be with them again. Their faces bear the marks of childlike curiosity and innocence, and I feel an overwhelming warmth inside me. They look at me inquisitively as I join them. "Why have you been acting so strange today, Mom?" my younger son asks in his gentle voice. I feel the need to explain my peculiar reaction during dinner. A smile forms on my lips as I carefully choose my words and start my narrative, disguised as a terrible nightmare. With every syllable that escapes me, my story unfolds, interwoven with past events and memories stemming from my nightmare. I describe the horror of the Titanic sinking, how I lost them both, how I was the only woman rescued from the cold water, and how purposeless my life was afterward, having to go on without them. My sons listen attentively, their large eyes fixed on me. I see confusion, curiosity, and a touch of concern in their faces. When I finish, I try to reassure them, saying, "But you know, in the end, it was just a nightmare. Sometimes our minds play strange tricks on us." They seem relieved as they agree with me. "That does sound really scary, Mom," my older son says. "But thankfully we're here on the Titanic, the safest ship of all time, and everything is safe." I smile and nod in agreement. Yes, exactly. Here we're safe, and we're going to have a wonderful journey. Afterward, my children excitedly and thoroughly tell me about the entertainment program they experienced in the grand dining room. They recount their day on the deck, the people they interacted with by the pool, and how successful they were playing chess with other youngsters. I listen attentively to them, and it feels as though we were never separated. Was the ordeal before just a nightmare after all? As the boys grow tired, they turn their attention back to their book until they fall asleep. I sit on a chair pretending to read a newspaper during this time. However, I find myself constantly glancing at my pocket watch. When it is 11 o'clock at night, I tuck my sleeping sons in, lean down, and kiss them on their foreheads. I feel the warmth of their skin beneath my lips. Another tear trickles down my cheek. Sleep well, my darlings. Sleep well. I'm here again, I whisper softly. I leave the cabin with my heart filled with affection and gratitude. It is now just before the time when, in our other reality, the Titanic would have struck the iceberg. Excitement wells up within me as I make my way to the bridge. I carry the memory of my sons and their innocence within me, hoping and fearing that everything will go smoothly. Chapter 17. The Iceberg. The wind gently rustles through my hair as I finally reach the door to the bridge. The atmosphere here seems calm and relaxed. Ismay is monitoring the instruments, glancing at the chart from time to time, while Hosono has grabbed a large pair of binoculars and is peering intently through the front bridge window. However, in the stern expressions of Hosono and Ismay, I can discern the mounting nervousness that is gripping all three of us. The darkness of the moonless night envelops us as we anxiously watch the clock. "There, the iceberg!" Hosono suddenly shouts with a panicked voice. His cry is echoed by several crew members stationed at various lookouts. "Iceberg ahead!" The cry reverberates through the bridge, and my heart nearly stops as I see the bluish colossus rapidly approaching with my own eyes. The crew erupts into a chaotic frenzy of commands. Anarchy reigns, but it's the deep, commanding voice of the captain that captures my full attention. "Hard a starboard! Murdoch! Hard a starboard!" The first officer frantically turns the wheel, and time seems to slow down within me. As if guided by an otherworldly force, I rush forward suddenly, pushing the officer aside and frantically turning the wheel back. Ismay looks at me incredulously, asking what I'm doing. "I remember what Richardson said," I quickly whisper. "We need to hit the iceberg head on. It'll flood fewer compartments that way. We'll gain more time." "What nonsense are you talking?" the captain roars. His voice echoes through the bridge, and a mixture of anger and fear wells up inside me. But there's no time for debates. Suddenly, the captain lunges towards the wheel with a cry, his eyes wild with rage. His movement is frantic and desperate. I see his hand reaching for the wheel. In his blind frenzy, he hits me and sends me sprawling to the side. The world spins for a moment as I crash to the floor with a resounding impact. Pain courses through me, and the bridge blurs briefly before my eyes. My heart races, and the air is filled with chaos and cries. Amidst this chaos, Hosono's voice rises. "Trust us! Please!" He moves toward the wheel, but the captain, driven by a burst of desperate madness, tries to shove Hosono aside with all his might. Then a single blow. The captain slams against the left bridge window and is caught by Murdoch. "I'm sorry!" Hosono exclaims, seizing the wheel and turning it back to its original course. I struggle to my feet and stand resolutely beside him. "Everyone, stay away from the wheel." I swear, vowing on my children's lives that I won't let anyone near the helm. The captain screams in outrage, "Mutineers!" Suddenly, an ear-piercing noise erupts. The Titanic collides head-on with the iceberg. The world seems to tremble, and the bridge is filled with fear and horror. The captain rages, accusing us, as the iceberg swiftly sinks into the ship in a matter of seconds. "We could have avoided it. Officers, arrest them both, immediately." Crew members grab me and Hosono by the arms. We no longer resist, knowing that there's nothing more we can do. Desperately, I hope that our efforts were not in vain and feel a mix of triumph and worry. As we are led away, we already hear distress calls being sent via radio and telegraph. Urgency and panic ring in every voice. We find ourselves in a holding cell, a cramped space where the muted sounds of the turbulent sea outside echo from the walls. Through the small barred window, I catch fleeting glimpses of the hectic activity on deck. Evacuation measures are in full swing. Lifeboats are being hastily lowered into the water, accompanied by hurried instructions and the clatter of metal against metal. Crew members rush past our cell, outfitting passengers with life vests and assisting them into the lifeboats. The scene outside resembles a frenzied dance, and gradually, it dawns on us that the chaos is not significantly different from our other reality. The only thing that remains is our hope that the head-on collision won't lead to disaster. Suddenly, a wave of concern washes over me for my sons, who are fearful and alone in this menacing moment, unaware of their mother's whereabouts. A pang of panic courses through me, and I grasp the handle of the prison door, shaking it as I let out uncontrollable screams. Hosono is with me, trying to reassure me, as my fear threatens to overwhelm me. Amidst this tense situation, we suddenly hear the familiar sound of a key being inserted into the lock. Our ears are glued to the clicking of the lock. Then, the heavy door swings open with a soft creak. Before us stands Ismay, without a word. In this dark hour, his presence radiates like a promising light in the darkness. Chapter 18. The Search. With silent determination, the three of us hurry out of the cell towards my cabin. It's as if an invisible bond has formed between us. The thought that Hosono and Ismay feel compelled to ensure the safety of me and my children warms my heart and gives me added courage. When we finally stand before my cabin, we see the open door and the empty room before us. We abruptly turn around and nervously make our way through the crowd of people caught in a whirlwind of despair. We constantly call their names. "Rossmore! Eugene!" The flickering lights in the corridors create an eerie atmosphere. Our steps quicken as we anxiously search for the familiar faces of my two sons. We continue to push forward through the narrow hallway as the chaos around us intensifies. Finally, when we reach the deck, we see, just like before, that the few available places in the lifeboats are hotly contested. Suddenly, Ismay appears to recognize familiar faces. "Lolo and Mon Mon," he exclaims when we stand before two children aged between 2 and 4. Their desperate father looks at Ismay with confusion, saying, "Do we know each other, sir?" Ismay startles as he realizes it was unwise to react to the children since it was in a different time and reality when he made significant efforts to find their mother. "No, I apologize, mister. But perhaps you can help us." Ismay tries to divert his attention. "Have you seen 2 teenagers, aged 13 and 16, wandering around here?" The man, visibly overwhelmed by the situation, confusedly denies seeing them. Suddenly, he unexpectedly thrusts his 2 children into Ismay's arms. With a shaky voice, he implores, "Please take care of my sons." Ismay instinctively looks towards the lifeboats. A crew member waves him over, approaching him. "What's your name?" Ismay asks the sailor. "Edward Bewley. I'm in charge of this lifeboat. He points to the last one in the row. Take these 2 children to safety, Mr. Bewley, Ismay requests. Hosono flinches at the sight of this man. It's only later that I realize this man played a significant role in his social stigma in the other reality. Bewley places the 2 children on the wooden benches, while the father introduces himself as Mr. Hoffman. The sons begin to cry heart-rendingly, and we watch as a woman in the boat comforts them. When we turn our gaze back to the deck, the father has disappeared into the chaos on the ship. Amidst the frantic scene, we make our way through the panicked crowd and continue our search. The Titanic is slowly tilting forward as the damaged areas are already filling with water. An oppressive feeling of fear hangs in the air, and I can feel my heart racing. Time is running out, and most of the spots in the evacuation boats are already taken. We tirelessly call out my sons' names as we run through the hallways, their voices drowned out by the loud cries of passengers and the sounds of the ship groaning. On the other side of the ship, we see more lifeboats, surrounded by anxious women and crying children. I shout my sons' names into the chaotic scene. A man, eager to help prepare the boats for evacuation, notices us and waves us over. I recognize him. It's Archibald Gracie, a writer whose name I know from the other reality. He went down with the ship but managed to survive. His book about the Titanic disaster made him famous, although he didn't get to enjoy his fame for long. He died just a few months after the publication of his work, succumbing to the effects of hypothermia he endured during his struggle for survival in the icy sea. As we approach him, Ismay and Hosono slightly distance themselves, aware that his book contributed to their social ostracization in the other world. "I think I've seen your children," he exclaims breathlessly. He briefly describes the 2 boys, and a wave of joy washes over me. I had already tried to place the boys in a lifeboat, but they weren't willing to go without their mother. His words hit me like a lightning bolt. My sons are nearby. He points towards the ship's kitchen. Hosono, Ismay, and I exchange excited glances as we rush in the indicated direction. A feeling of relief overtakes me, and we sprint through the corridors until we reach the kitchen. A chaotic mess unfolds before us, with frantic people crossing our path, desperately seeking an escape route. Dishes clatter, pots fall to the floor, and the air is filled with a mixture of fear and haste. We search through the various kitchen rooms, every nook and cranny. In doing so, we experience the full extent of the panic up close. People slipping due to the ship's tilt, others huddling in corners. Some try to hold on to swinging doors as the ship continues to slowly tilt forward. We catch the acrid smell of vomit in the air. Finally, we arrive in a quieter part of the kitchen, where cabinets are filled with wine and spirit bottles. A man, holding a bottle of whiskey in his hand, takes a sip while steadying himself against a cabinet. Our voices become frantic as we urgently ask him about the 2 boys. He turns slowly towards us, a weary smile on his lips. Behind him, a hesitant child's voice says, "Mom?" The man takes a step aside, revealing my 2 sons. A radiant sense of relief and infinite joy brightens their faces as they lay eyes on me. We embrace each other, sobbing, time standing still for a moment, and the world around us fading away. In a soft whisper, I breathe into their ears. I'm back. My older son, Rossmore, responds with a quivering voice. "The nightmare is coming true, isn't it?" "No, it will be different. It must be different." I plead to the heavens as tears stream down my cheeks. I recall that time is of the essence, and I turn to the gentleman. "I thank you from the bottom of my heart for looking after my sons," I say with a touch of emotion. The man slurs slightly. "Well, actually, I wanted to help them find their mother." But when I realized how frightened, the two were, I decided to take a little detour to the spirits to calm our nerves. Don't worry, your sons had no interest in the whiskey. I drank it for the three of us. He lets out a tipsy laugh while taking a hefty swig from the bottle. His demeanor seems to suggest that he barely comprehends the seriousness of the situation. We bid him farewell and hastily continue our way to the lifeboats. As we once again traverse the chaos of the kitchen, Eugene tells me that the man was Charles, the head baker. I remember Richardson talking about him. In the other reality, Charles Jowen became known for surviving 2 hours in the icy sea because he had consumed 2 bottles of whiskey before. Chapter 19. The Last Boat. We rush to the port side of the ship and are horrified to find that only one lifeboat remains there. As we approach it, we are halted by an officer who suddenly appears before us. "Women and children only," he declares firmly. A wild pounding fills my chest as I suddenly realize who stands before me. It's Officer Charles Lightoller, the man who had offered me a spot on that lifeboat in another reality. I had declined his offer back then, fearing that my teenage sons might not pass for children. With a pleading look, I implore Lightoller, my voice barely more than a whisper. Please, my sons must get on the lifeboat. His demeanor is marked by humility, as he apologizes in a gentle tone. I'm truly sorry. I understand your situation, but I can only allow children and women on the lifeboats. I sense the officer's inner conflict, the heavy burden of responsibility weighing on him. A hint of understanding for his position fills me as I look into his eyes. I understand that you must fulfill your duty, but please see, my sons are still youths. If they stay here, they are just as much in danger as any woman or child. Please give us a chance to survive. As he insists that only I can be taken, my throat tightens. Tears blur my vision as I turn to my sons. They reassure me that it's okay, but I can't accept this instruction. A wave of desperation washes over me. Hosono is by my side, trying to comfort us. From the background, Ismay approaches Lightoller and speaks quietly to him. The tension between the two men is palpable as they engage in a face-to-face discussion, their words sounding like a quiet struggle. Eventually, Lightoller returns to us, his features soft and compassionate. A gentle nod accompanies his decision as he clears the way for me and my sons, as no other women or children are currently visible on deck. I embrace him in infinite gratitude, tears streaming down my face. I let my sons board the lifeboat first, turning to Hosono and Ismay. I see tears glistening in their eyes. Words are unnecessary between us. The intensity of our gazes speaks volumes. Due to the uncertainty of whether the Titanic is doomed or not, our heartfelt embrace carries a certain finality. The air is filled with a mixture of overwhelming helplessness and farewell pain. Yet both men exude a kind of inner peace, as if they had long overcome the inner conflict they once had. Lightoller politely works to separate us, for the lifeboat is now filled to the last seat and must depart. Chapter 20. Fight for Survival. With tear-stained faces, I make my way to my sons to join them. However, as I attempt to sit down beside them, my gaze falls upon a gentleman who has already taken a seat next to them. I'm confused, as the sudden presence of this man seems mysterious. Apparently, he had skillfully maneuvered his way past us while Ismay and Lightoller were talking. Finding no available space, I look around for help. I spot another officer approaching us, as if he had heard my silent plea. Determinedly, he calls out, "Women and children only. Leave the boat immediately." I notice that it's William Murdoch, the first officer, the same one I had wrested the wheel from on the bridge. His words are resolute, but there's a hint of understanding in his tone. His gaze shows his determination to stand up for the passengers' well-being and maintain order. However, suddenly, the man next to me reaches for an oar and wildly swings it to defend his place in the boat. I instinctively throw myself protectively over my children. The cries of passengers pierce the air, panic palpable in the atmosphere. Murdoch doesn't hesitate to step in the way of the attacker. Lightoller rushes in as well. Both confront the man, struggling to calm the heated situation and stop the violence. The oar becomes a dangerous weapon, and both officers try to dodge the attacks. Murdoch, however, is struck and nearly tumbles over the railing into the open sea. Hosono manages to hold him back just in time. Murdoch is furious, but before he can draw his sidearm, his savior calms him down. Now, Ismay and Lightoller move decisively toward the man and manage to wrest the oar from him. Together with Hosono and Murdoch, they persuade him to return to the deck. There, they talk to him until he calms down. I can understand the man who acted out of pure survival instinct in this desperate situation. Still, a deep sense of relief washes over me as I finally embrace my two sons tightly and am allowed to sit beside them. Then, with a firm nod, Lightoller gives the command to lower the lifeboat. The atmosphere is tense as the boat slowly descends from the Titanic. Suddenly, we all realize that our boat is positioned above another boat full of passengers due to the ship's tilt and could crash onto it. Without hesitation, Lightoller jumps from the railing, daringly joining us. His impact is harsh and painful, yet he immediately takes control. With a firm hand on the rudder, Lightoller fights against the boat's tilt. His clear instructions cut through the chaos on the deck. He calls on the crew for help in carefully lowering the lifeboat without endangering the one below. The men eagerly follow his orders, moving the ropes and slowly lowering the boat. The icy wind whips around us as the lifeboat gradually approaches the water. Lightoller's expertise becomes evident as he skillfully balances the boat with precise movements. A deep sigh of relief escapes him as the lifeboat finally gently touches the water. His face is flushed from the exertion, but his eyes gleam with relief. A collective sigh of relief sweeps through the passengers. We feel the extraordinary effort and dedication he has invested in the moment. Lightoller fights his way back to the deck, using the sturdy grip of ladders and railings to overcome the ship's tilt. Despite the risk of slipping, he reaches the Titanic's railing, where Ismay and Hosono lend him a hand, panting with exhaustion. In awe and gratitude, we all applaud enthusiastically. A faint smile forms on Lightoller's lips as he knows he has successfully fulfilled his duty. Chapter 21. The Farewell. The lifeboat slowly departs, and we wave goodbye to Ismay and Hosono. A lump forms in my throat as we leave them behind in the distance. They remain on the Titanic, which tilts but stands still on the water, carried by hope that it will defy fate. The air is filled with a heavy uncertainty about what lies ahead as we reluctantly part from each other. The moments of farewell seem endless, and I feel the connection between us slowly being stretched by distance. After a painfully long time of waiting and worrying, we finally see the illuminated rescue ship, the Carpathia, appear on the horizon. Our restlessness gives way to a feeling of relief as we see help approaching. When we finally transfer to the rescue ship, a sense of security envelops us. The palpable safety on board is like a warm blanket protecting us from the cold of the past hours. The other passengers who were also rescued bear expressions of exhaustion and gratitude on their faces. People console each other, and it's as if an invisible bond of solidarity has formed among us all, carrying us through this unprecedented night. The hardships of the past hours soon lull me into a deep sleep. In my dreams, I hear the two words repeatedly, "Come back, come back." Suddenly, Rossmore gently wakes me from my slumber. "I'm back," escapes my lips reflexively before I realize that the voice was only from my dream. Rossmore's eyes shine with happiness as he informs me that the Titanic apparently won't sink. The officers here have reported that water seems to have entered only in 3 compartments of the ship. The Titanic will easily survive this. "Then it truly is the safest ship in the world," Eugene exclaims excitedly. I cry tears of joy as I hold my children close. A profound sense of gratitude fills my heart, because we have managed to ensure that none of the passengers have come to harm. A feeling of bliss washes over me as I realize that everyone, including Hosono and Ismay, will emerge from this tragedy unscathed. As the Carpathia slowly heads for safe waters, we feel the long-lasting tension gradually giving way to a deep calm. We are informed that other rescue ships have already reached the Titanic to evacuate the remaining passengers and tow the damaged ship to New York. Together with my sons, I finally find a moment of respite. Under the protective night sky that now surrounds us safely, I sink into a deep sleep, my children nestled closely to me. The certainty that the Titanic won't sink envelops me like a warm feeling of pure happiness. Chapter 22. Voices from the Beyond. While I rest in sleep, a familiar voice reaches me once again, whispering softly but insistently, "Come back." Amidst the chatter of passengers on the Carpathia and the gentle play of ocean waves, more words reach me, carrying a strange significance. I perceive a blurred and oppressive murmur from which I can only grasp vague fragments. Faulty snorkel system. Penetrated into the battery compartments. White figures speak of defective valves and infiltrated water. Toxic fumes in the pressure chamber, oxygen depletion. In between, I hear the familiar cries, "Come back, come back." Air purification system failure. Hopeless situation. I dream of lying in a bright green room. Several people surround me. Suddenly, a vivid memory appears before my inner eye. Richardson, hastily operating the instruments in the submarine, his eyes wide with panic and fear. An unusual smell fills my senses, a peculiar blend of sulfur and metal. In this moment, I realize that this scent has accompanied me since my return to the Titanic, though I hadn't consciously perceived it. A suffocating tightness envelops me. More fragments reach my ears, and with the others, cognitive dysfunction, paralysis, unfortunately didn't make it, neurological failure. The words glide like eerie ghosts through my dream. I try to understand these voices, these fragmented sentences that dance like shadows in my perception. An inexplicable unease creeps through me. I believe I hear doctors discussing medical details in a hospital. I find solace in clinging to the certainty that I am actually on the Carpathia, with my children, safe. But the voices, they constantly whisper about dangerous gases that induce hallucinations. Confusion and fear creep into my thoughts as I continue to get entangled in this eerie conversation that I still want to believe is a dream. The boundary between reality and illusion blurs, and I feel trapped in the clutches of an eerie darkness that slowly suffocates me. Then, my mind gradually begins to grasp. In the dream, my eyes reflexively want to open, but I resist. I want to stay with my sons. Suddenly, I see the face of George, my husband. With tears in his eyes, he whispers the familiar words to me. "Come back. Come back, my love." I do not respond. Even though his grief touches me, I do not want to return to the old reality. I want to be in the world where my sons live, where Hosono and Ismay find their peace, where 1,500 people do not lose their lives through the sinking of the Titanic. To me, the vague voices belong to a chaotic dream, which I interpret as a form of internal processing of my experiences on the Titanic. With this decision, I reassure myself and continue to sleep until I naturally awaken. Chapter 23. A New Life. 3 days later, I stand with anticipation alongside my sons on the deck of the Carpathia as a large, dark shadow looms over us. It is the Statue of Liberty, welcoming us silently and majestically. A sense of awe fills the hearts of the passengers as we collectively witness the ship's entry into the port of New York. An ocean of emotions washes over me, a mixture of joy, relief, and melancholy. As the Carpathia glides slowly and steadily into the safe harbor, I feel the urge to hold my sons tightly once more. In this moment of deep embrace, I feel a profound connection that goes beyond words. We have embarked on a journey of overcoming together, and before us lies the promise of a fresh start. The Statue of Liberty drifts past as a silent witness to our arrival. A fresh breeze of the future replaces the final breath of the past. We look forward to our new life. Epilogue. This fictional narrative is based on various accounts of the tragedy of the Titanic, that mighty ship that once sank in the ocean. The events and characters described here are not intended to be an exact representation of real facts. It should be emphasized that the story has no intention of causing harm or offense to the victims of this tragedy, or to the personalities described here, including their descendants. Instead, it is meant to touch our thoughts and emotions. It is meant to inspire us to contemplate what lies beyond our reality. And it is meant to preserve life, in our attention and in our memory. The real individuals from the story. Rhoda Mary Abbott, 1873 to 1946. Lost her 2 sons, Rossmore and Eugene, in the Titanic disaster. She survived as the only woman among those who went down with the ship. Masabumi Hosono, 1870 to 1939. He was the only Japanese passenger on the Titanic and faced criticism in Japan for surviving in a lifeboat meant for women and children. Joseph Bruce Ismay, 1862 to 1937. As the director of the White Star Line, he was involved in the construction of the Titanic and faced blame for the lack of lifeboats and the ship's excessive speed. He was also criticized for surviving in a lifeboat meant for women and children. James Richardson, birth and death dates unknown, was an engineer and assistant manager at the Scots Shipbuilding and Engineering Company in Greenock, Scotland. He designed an innovative submarine snorkel system in 1916, but had no connection to the Titanic. Rossmore Edward Abbott, 1896 to 1912. He was the eldest son of Rhoda Mary Abbott and perished in the Titanic sinking. Eugene Joseph Abbott, 1899 to 1912. He was the youngest son of Rhoda Mary Abbott and also tragically died in the Titanic sinking. George Charles Williams, 1875 to 1938. He was Rhoda Mary Abbott's second husband. William McMaster Murdoch, 1873 to 1912. He served as the first officer of the Titanic, was in command during the Iceberg collision, and was responsible for the lifeboats on the starboard side. He tragically died in the Titanic disaster. Charles Herbert Lightoller, 1874 to 1952. He was the second officer of the Titanic, responsible for the lifeboats, on the port side, strictly adhering to the protocol of allowing only women and children into the lifeboats. He risked his life to prevent accidents during the evacuation and was the last survivor to board the rescue ship Carpathia. Edward John Smith, 1850 to 1912. He was the captain of the Titanic, renowned for his extensive seafaring experience. He was involved in planning the ship and sadly perished in the Titanic sinking. Maurice Fitzgerald, 1844 to 1931. A Canadian captain known for his expertise in sailing heavy-laden ships. He switched to the coal business after his career as a captain, but had no connection to the Titanic. Charles Jaugen, 1878 to 1956. He was the head baker aboard the Titanic and survived the sinking, allegedly able to endure over 3 hours in the cold seawater due to consuming a significant amount of alcohol. Edward John Bewley, 1885 to 1917. A crew member of the Titanic who assisted in loading the lifeboats on the starboard side. He survived the sinking. Archibald Gracie, 1859 to 1912. A passenger on the Titanic, known as a historian and writer. He survived the sinking and became renowned for his extensive book about the Titanic disaster, but tragically died a few months later due to the aftermath of the tragedy. Mr. Hoffman, actually Michel Navratil Sr., 1880 to 1912. A passenger on the Titanic who assumed the name Mr. Hoffman to secretly take his children, Michel and Edmund, also known as Lolo and Monmont, to America without his ex-wife's knowledge. He handed the children to crew members before the lifeboats, and he himself perished in the sinking. Lolo, actually Michel Marcel Navratil, 1908 to 2001. Known as one of the orphaned children of the Titanic, he survived the sinking and passed away in 2001 as one of the last male survivors of the Titanic. Monmont, actually Edmund Roger Navratil, 1910 to 1953. Also known as one of the orphaned children of the Titanic, he survived the sinking. The Titanic left many wounds within me, yet these wounds are not visible and cannot be treated. They run deep and it takes a great deal of time for them to heal. Antoinette Flegenheim, Titanic survivor from Germany. You have been listening to Beyond History. Head on into the iceberg. A different course for the Titanic.